Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So for today, we've got something special. So our sponsor for today's video, Para-Bellum-Games, has sent me a Rakshasa Ravanar box, and we're going to be painting this up today. So if you're interested in the unboxing, I have a blog post kind of detailing all of that over on our brand new website, jtswargaming.com. So there'll be a link down in the video description with a link to that post. If anybody's interested in seeing what the sprues look like and so forth. But today's video, we're strictly going to be painting this awesome new model for the Sorcerer Kings. So before we dive into that, if you all are interested in saving money on your Conquest miniatures, if you're thinking about picking up your own Ravanar kit, you can save 10% by using our affiliate links and discount code, which will also be down in the description of the video. But without further ado, let's hop down to the hobby desk and we'll get started. All right, so here is the kit, and as you can see, I've got it partially assembled. We're going to be working in some sub-assemblies today just to make everything a little bit easier to paint, and thankfully there aren't that many of them. So we have the main body. Move some stuff out of the way so we can get that centered. And so as you can see, there really aren't that many different textures on the miniature. So all of the armor is going to be metallic, and then we've got some skin, little fabric on the skirt, and then we've also got the spear, which will have some extra details on it. Then he's kind of got this big, giant, flaming aura thing that attaches to his back. So we left that off so that we'll be able to reach the areas of the skin that will be visible very, very easily. He's also got this little tassel thing that kind of sockets onto his chest right here and then has that cloth draped down. So we left that off so that we'll be able to paint all of this area. And then we've also left the head separate so that it'll be easier to paint the hair rather than having it, on the miniature and then have the flames blocking it. The other thing that you really can't see, but the shoulder pads here are just blue tacked down because we're going to paint all of the metallics first, and then I'll take those off so that we can get the skin that's going to be visible. Now, one other thing I want to mention, so we did prime with a gray primer through an airbrush, no zenithal or anything like that, since a large portion of the miniature is going to be painted via layering, and a lot of it is going to be metallics. So we're going to go ahead and get started on those metallics first. All right, so to start out with, since a lot of these metallics are going to be gold, we're going to base coat them with Viking Gold from Scale 75's Metal and Alchemy range. And because we're painting a very large monster, we're going to be starting out with our size 6 brush. Nice big brush with a huge belly, but it still has a really nice tip on it, so we can be precise. And all of the armor elements that we want to be gold, we're just going to go ahead and base coat them. And I'm going to try and leave the autofocus on for this video. Since we're working with a nice huge miniature, I'm hoping that it will work. But if I happen to notice while I'm recording that it's gone rogue, I'll go ahead and manually focus the shots. We've got all of that Viking gold applied, and now we're going to dry brush all of the gold areas with some Scale 75 Dwarven Gold. With our brush semi-damp, we're just gonna go ahead and drag it over all of these gold areas. This will help pick out the detail and brighten up our raised areas just a bit. So we're not applying too much pressure. But since the brush is damp on any flat areas, it is going to deposit some of the paint. So you just want to think about where highlights would be on the model as you're doing this. And if something is supposed to be completely in shadow, you can just avoid dry brushing those areas. And now we're going to come in with a second dry brush stage of scale 75 Elven Gold. And we're going to go for an even lighter touch this time around and kind of focus on the hard edges. So again, very little pressure, really only focused on the highlight areas. Alright, so now we're going to wash all of the gold with Army Painter Purple Tone. And I've thinned that out in a 1-to-1 mix with a little bit of Speed Paint Medium, just so it's not quite as strong. And we'll give that a good mix on the palette. And then we're just going to wash this all over those gold areas. And this will give us a kind of really nice rose gold appearance. With that wash applied, we're going to go back to our Elven Gold, and we're just going to very lightly dry brush, mostly trying to just catch the edges to reclaim some of those points of light that you might have lost. And to finish off the gold, we're going to grab Canoptic Alloy from the Citadel range, and we're just going to add little glints of light around the model in areas that make sense. So any little like rivets in the armor, you could take a fine-tipped brush and just dot those. And then on any sharp edges and corners, you can add a little bit in that corner as well. So now that we have all of that gold armor done, we're going to move on to our silvers. And to start out with, we're going to use pig iron from P3. All right, so with this color, we're looking to base coat the silver portions of the halberd. So the blade and the spear tip. And then we're also going to use this on the chain areas as well. And we're also going to use this to base coat the remaining part of the greaves that have been unpainted. So we've got that silver base coat down, and I do want to point out with the chain, you want to make sure that you spin the model around and make sure that you get nice coverage over the entirety of the chain. If you happen to spill over onto like the hand, you know, that's okay. We haven't painted the skin yet, but you do want to be careful when you get really close to the silvers that, you know, you can save yourself some cleanup work. Now that we've got that base coat applied, though, we're going to take Citadel Iron Breaker, and we're going to layer this onto the greaves as a highlight. Now, a lot of the greaves are in shadow, so there's not much that we need to do here, but any of the raised upturn areas that would be receiving a little bit more light, we're just going to layer this onto those surfaces. And this will be a very subtle highlight, but it will add just a little bit of extra brightness that wasn't there previously. And for the rest of the silver areas, we're just going to dry brush that color onto the silver bits of the halberd and the chain as well. Right, and for our final highlight, we're going to move to P3 Quicksilver, and we're swapping back to our pointed round brush for this. And we're really just looking to add some small spot reflections and do some edge highlighting here. So on the edge of the spear blade, you can use the side of your brush. And then you can also hit any kind of sharp corners. And then for the greaves, we can put a little bit of this inside our previous highlight area and just raise the brightness on the highest portion of the greaves that's going to be visible. Right, and now we're going to shade some of those silver areas, and we're going to thin out some basilicanum gray, about 1-to-1 with some speed paint medium or contrast medium. And all we're going to do is run this on the section of the halberd that is silver. And then we're also going to do this on the chain links as well. All right, so now that we're done with all of the metallics, I've gone ahead and removed the shoulder pads, and we're going to start working on the skin. Now, I'm going to do sort of a bluish purple skin here, so we're going to work with a triad. Colors, we're going to use Scale 75 Violet. Then our midtone's going to be Scale 75 Mediterranean Blue. And then we're going to have some sky blue in the highlights. So to start off with, we're going to base coat all of the skin with violet. And for the wide open areas, we're going to go ahead and keep using our large, what is this, size 6 brush. But there will be some areas where it's going to be, too tight of a fit. So you will want to move down to a smaller size. And also remember, the flames are going to be covering the majority of the back. So you can paint that area if you want some practice, on your blending and so forth. But a large portion of it is going to be covered up. So if you're worried about speed, you can feel free to skip those areas. Right, so we've got that purple base coat on all of the skin, and I did want to point out, I'm going to do a little bit of a blend from the purple into dark blue-black on the feet, so we left the transition here a little bit jagged. We'll handle that later once we're done with the rest of the skin. So now we're going to move into a 50-50 mix of the violet and the Mediterranean blue. And we're going to be focused on the raised areas of the skin. We're just going to layer this right on top of that violet, but we don't want to cover the violet that's down in the recesses. So we're going to take our time and go around the model and go ahead and apply this highlight color. Alright, so now that we've got those first highlights sketched in, we've added in one more part of Mediterranean blue to lighten up the mixture just a little bit more. And now we're going to come back inside the highlights that we've just done and do a second highlight in this lighter color. And with the Scale 75 paints, they look brighter when they're wet. So you want to thin down your paint just like you normally would, but don't get too scared when you see that initial color. You kind of have to wait until it dries in order to see what it's going to look like. All right, now with that second highlight applied, we're almost done with the skin. So what we're going to do next is take a 50-50 mix of Mediterranean blue and sky blue, and we're just doing sort of spot highlights to brighten up very specific parts of the mini. So we're going to put a dot of this on the knuckles that are going to be visible. Just to kind of help give that definition to the model. And then on the most prominent areas where we've got highlight showing, you could put just a little bit of this inside the previous highlight. So now with those final highlights applied, we'll still need to smooth out those transitions, and we'll handle that in just a second. But first, we're going to do the transition on the feet. And so for that, we're going to need Abyssal Blue from scale 75. So to prep this, excuse me, we want pretty good coverage on the areas that are still white. And we want to run this into the purple in jagged lines. And then the parts that are still white, you might need a couple of coats to build up really solid coverage. But we kind of want the jagged lines going into the purple to be kind of faded, so that that purple is still kind of showing through underneath. And so we're going to start in the purple and drag it back toward the gray. So to smooth out those transitions, we're going to use a little Army Painter blue tone ink, and we're going to make a glaze out of this. So we're going to use 1 drop of the ink to about 10 parts of matte medium. And this is just Liquitex matte medium that I decant from a giant bottle into a little dropper bottle. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So just mix that up thoroughly on the palette. And this is going to be super thin and super translucent. Now, with this being an ink, you could thin it with water. I just prefer to thin my paints with medium. So it still behaves like a paint instead of being super runny. I find that I can control it a little bit better that way. And so all we're going to do is get a little bit of this on our brush, and we're going to brush over all of the skin areas in the first pass. And now this is going to take a few passes of this before we get the blend that we want. And with each successive pass, I'm going to concentrate more on the shadows and away from our highlights, so that I don't turn those into a dark blue. But we'll do a couple of passes off camera, and then I'll show you how it's looking kind of midway through and then at the end as well. So here we are after about 3 layers rather, of the glaze on the main body, and most of those transitions on the muscles are looking pretty good at this stage. There are a couple that might need a little bit more work, like here on the thigh near the knee. And then to show you guys the feet, those are starting to look pretty well blended as well. Now at this stage on the feet, I'm probably going to go with raw blue tone just to help speed that up. But yeah, the skin is looking pretty good at this point, and we can transition into working on the cloth. All right, so I've skipped ahead a little bit in the process, but I did want to touch on just how I worked on the head. So the skin was pretty much the same process as the rest of the skin. The eyes, however, I left in that primer, gray primer, and I gave it a coat of ball red, just 1 coat. And then once that had dried, I dotted the pupils with Teneri yellow. And then once that was dry, I thinned down a little magma draw flame and glazed it over the eyeball and the surrounding socket. So what this did over the eyeball was help bring the red and the Teneri yellow a little bit closer together. But then when you put the orange glaze over the blue and the purple, it shifts it from a cold purple to a warm purple and just kind of helps deepen the color of the eye sockets, which ends up with that effect, which I was pretty happy with. Now, for the hair, that was just a single coat of Wildwood. Contrast gives a really nice, rich brown color, and then just a little bit of Skeleton Horde contrast paint on the teeth. And then all of the gold bits were done the same way we did the gold on the rest of the miniature. All right, so back to trying to finish off the main body today. So I struggled a little bit with what color I wanted the skirt that the miniature is wearing to be. So we have this warm gold, which is sort of all over the place. And then we've got the cool skin. So I wanted something that was maybe bright and still warm to kind of help contrast with the darker skin tones. So what I landed on was this sort of lime green effect, which I practiced on the little, I don't even know what you call this, tassel? I don't know, whatever this is, that slots into the chest. I practiced on this until I came up with a color blend that I was kind of happy with. And now we're going to replicate this scheme onto the skirt. So for this, we're going to use a few different scale 75 paints. So in the shadows, we're going to have Black Forest Green. And then for the main color of the skirt, we're going to have Irati Green. And then in the highlights, we'll be mixing in a little Soul Yellow, as well as for the extreme highlights, some Teneri Yellow. But the very first step, we need to get a really nice base coat of this Irati Green down on the miniature. So, nice and simple, all we're going to do is give the robes a nice base coat of this bright Irati Green. From previous experience, this paint, the pigmentation is a little thin, even going over this light gray. So you may need, 2 or 3 coats to build up some solid coverage. So just take your time, be neat when you get close to the other details. You might want to swap to a smaller brush and get all of those robes nice and coated. So we've got solid coverage of that Irati green all over the robes. And so off camera, might be a little hard to see, I went ahead and painted the inside with Black Forest Green. And now I've thinned that down, not quite to a glaze. It's probably more closer to the consistency of an enamel thinner, or not thinner, filter. So it's very transparent, but not quite as transparent as a glaze. And we're going to run this into all of the recessed folds on the robes. Now, if you get a little bit of this on the raised areas, that's okay. We're going to be covering that up. But we just want to run a little bit of this darker color down into all of the recesses before we start highlighting. Right, so we've got that recess shade applied, and as you can see, it's a little messy, and it's not that big of a jumping color on its own. So now what we're going to do is lay in some highlights that are going to really brighten everything up and help those shadows to pop a little bit more. Now, to do that and make things a little bit easier on ourselves, we are going to dry brush where we can get away with it. There are going to be some areas in the model where you really can't get a dry brush in there, and we'll have to go back in and layer traditionally. But we're going to do progressively lighter mixes of Soul Yellow and, not Black Forest Green, Irati Green, to highlight these robes. So I've got a strip of both on the paint. The first mix we're going to do is going to be about 50-50. Let's work that into the bristles. Give it the old hand test. And then, like I said, where we can get away with it, we're just going to dry brush this onto the miniature. And we want our dry brush to, whoop, that was a little bit too much moisture. We want it to be a little moist so that we can keep this smooth, but not so moist that it runs like it just did a minute ago. So we're just going to very lightly go ahead and dry brush this on. All right, so here we are with the first pass of the dry brushing done. Now we're going to do a second pass, and we're going to use mostly Soul Yellow, with just a touch of the Irati Green in. And then this time around, we're really focused on the extreme highlights. So very soft touch, kind of move the brush in a circular motion. Right, so here we are with the second pass done. And we're going to do one more pass that has just a little bit of Teneri Yellow mixed in. So it's going to be a majority of that Soul Yellow, a touch of the Irati Green, and some of that Teneri Yellow mixed in. Just lighten that up even more. And now we want this one to be a little bit drier than the previous dry brushing, because we really only want to catch extreme edges. So very, very light touch in the prominent areas where the robes are catching some light. So we're going to smooth out the transitions just a little bit. So we're going to mix up a glaze of Carangus Green the same way we've been doing. So about 1 part paint to about 10 parts medium. Got my glaze mixed up, and we're just going to run a very, very tiny amount of this over all of the robes. And I'm only going to do maybe 1 or 2 passes with this. I really don't want to darken down those highlights. I want to keep those highlights nice and bright. But this will just soften the color transitions just a tiny, tiny bit. Mostly worried about the shadows, and then on the right thigh with that big bright transition. This will just help unify all of the colors together. So here we are just after the first pass with the Carangus Green glaze, and I think that actually looks pretty good. We can call the cloth pretty much done. So we've got just a couple more elements here on the body that we need to knock out. So there's this little, I actually don't know what that's called, but it looks like it's some sort of fabric element. And then there's a couple of the shoulder pad tassels that are actually connected to the miniature. So what I'm going to do for that is we're going to go with a pastel peach from the AK 3rd Gen line. And we're going to mix in just a little bit of ball red, just a touch to darken it down. And we're going to base coat these areas with the shadow tone first, which is going to be that mix, and then we're going to highlight it with pure pastel peach. So we want to be very, very careful. So I'm moving down to a smaller brush, and we're just going to go ahead and base coat with this shadow tone. And we want to be very neat here. We don't want to do any touch-up work on any of the green fabric. So with that shadow tone applied, we're now going to come in with pure pastel peach. And now on the tassels, we're just going to kind of draw in the highlights. The details are super, super fine and a little soft. So we're just going to kind of approximate the strands. And then over on that hip pad, for lack of a better term, we're just going to apply this on all of the raised bumps. So now we're going to shade these areas, and to do that, we're going to use Casandora Yellow from Citadel. And now I've got some of this out on the wet palette so I can control it. And all we're going to do is just run this all over these peach areas. And with that stage out of the way, we're pretty much okay to fully assemble the main body. So there's a couple of areas that still need touched up. I did not realize that he's actually got a collar around his neck. So I'll probably paint that in gold. But we can set the main body aside for now and get started on the flames that are shooting out of his back. So for the flames that are shooting out of the back, I had the idea to, instead of painting it like a standard fire, sort of like the studio paint job, to kind of do it as like his aura is just like explosive, sort of a la Dragon Ball Z. So what we're going to do first, we've got a light gray prime on here, and we're going to thin down some Neolock Oxide technical paint from Citadel. And we're going to thin it to about a wash consistency, just with water. And we're going to slap this all over the flames. So all we're going to do, again, is just literally slap this everywhere. And it's okay if it's a little patchy. We do want more color sort of down in the recesses. But toward the upper bits of the flame, we will be covering this up. And then we're also going to be kind of doing a little bit of glazing over it. So if it's a little patchy, that's okay. Now that that Neolock Oxide is dry, we're going to go ahead and do a progression of dry brushes to prepare the flames for the glaze, which will be the final step. So I'm kind of mimicking Super Saiyan sort of power-up aura. So if you reference like pictures of Super Saiyan God Goku, all right, so here is the pure white that we're dry brushing on the part of the flames that's going to be closest to the body. And we're going to carry this up about a third of the way. And you're also going to want to make sure that inside you also dry brush that area as well. All right, so for the second stage of dry brushing, we're going to go ahead and add about 50% sky blue. Make a really nice light baby blue color. And we're going to do the second third of the way up the flames. And for the last third, we're going to go about 2 parts sky blue to 1 part white. This is going to be way more pigmented. And here we're really just focused on the top third. We want to be a little sparing with this and really only hit those sharp edges. So with that dry brushing done, we're going to take Aethermatic Blue contrast paint and cut it about 50-50 with a little bit of our matte medium again so that it is more like a filter and behaves more like a standard paint instead of a contrast paint. And we're just going to completely cover all of the flames. And then it's kind of up to you how saturated you want this color to be. You might, choose to do more than one coat. We'll see what it looks like when I'm done. But you just want to go ahead and coat the entirety of the flames. Make sure you control any pulling that ends up happening. All right, so unfortunately, I completed the flame effect and forgot to record the intermediary steps. I have no idea what happened, but we're just going to roll with it. So the only parts that you guys had missed, so you saw me applying the Aethermatic Blue, and I wet blended some Frost Heart up toward the tops of the flames. And then I used a mix of the two that I had thinned down with a little bit of medium just to kind of help smooth that transition a little bit. Now, if you had did this with an airbrush, you probably could have got it way smoother than what I did here. But it's not that bad. The harshness of my desk lights kind of like add some glare to it, which makes it a little bit difficult to see. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to get this put on the miniature's back. I'll take some better shots in my light box, and I'll show you guys what the finished miniature looks like. Right, so here is the final miniature. I went ahead and added just a couple of tiny other details. So I did a little bit of a glow effect on the head of the halberd, and I'll throw a picture on screen of a close-up of it. It's a little bit blurry in the shot. The miniature is actually so big, it wouldn't fit into my light box on the Lazy Susan for me to take good pictures and get a video. So I kind of had to do a janky sort of camera setup on my kitchen island to get some footage for you guys. But I had a lot of fun painting this, experimenting with new colors like the bright lime green on the robes was pretty new to me. I've never really messed with that color palette, and it was a really fun miniature to paint because of those little challenges like that. But again, thank you all so much for making it to the end of the video. I do want to take a moment and shout out my channel member, Mr. Roland Lucas. You rock. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can click the like button, you can subscribe, turn on the notifications, so that way you know whenever I release new content. The Conquest train is going to continue. I still got plenty of models from the Sorcerer Kings to work my way through over the next few weeks. And I've actually got some other factions kind of sitting back in the wings. So we might sprinkle in some city-states or some 100 kingdoms, maybe a little Nords. We'll see how we're feeling. And yeah, so that's all I got for today, guys. I'll catch you in the next video. Happy wargaming.